This happened 3 or 4 summers ago when I was in college. My family has a beach house in a small town on the Jersey Shore, and because my internship that summer was fully remote, I was spending entire weeks down there by myself. My friends preferred hanging out at the shore anyway, so on weekends they'd come down and we'd have a good time. But during the week, it was just me. The town was dead on weekdays, especially at night, which I liked because of how peaceful and quiet things would get. One of my favorite things to do was swim in the ocean after the lifeguards went off duty. I know a lot of people assume the ocean is freezing at night, but it's really not. The sun heats it all day, and that much water holds temperature for a long time. On a warm summer night, the water is perfectly fine. I'd been doing it all summer, and it was never excruciatingly uncomfortable. Also, I'm sure a lot of people would be quick to call late night activity like that dangerous, and they'd have a point. But I'd been swimming competitively since before high school, so I was confident in my abilities. One night on a random weekday, I walked down to the beach sometime after 10. The streets were empty the whole way there, which was normal for a weeknight in that town. The sand felt refreshing, and I was eager to get my swim in because of the exhausting day I just had. All I wanted to do was cool off in the water and think. My version of a cleanse. I left my stuff on one of the overturned lifeguard chairs and waded in. It was dark, but not pitch black. There was enough light from the boardwalk and the moon that I could see the shoreline behind me and the general shape of the water around me. I swam out to about where I usually go, maybe 50 yards from shore, and I just floated there for a while. The water was calm and the sky was crystal clear that night, so I was perfectly content to just lie on my back and stargaze. If you've ever been to a quieter residential beach town, you know how good the stars are at night, especially if you're in the water. I was getting lost in my thoughts. Staring up at the stars was causing me to disassociate a little. But then out of nowhere, I heard a woman's voice yelling for help. It was so abrupt and unexpected that I couldn't help myself from gasping out loud. I immediately reoriented myself in the water so I could see. It took me a few seconds to realize where the yelling was coming from. I initially assumed she was yelling from somewhere on the shoreline, but she wasn't. The yelling was coming from behind me, from somewhere farther out into the ocean. I turned back around and listened. She was yelling, "Help me," repeatedly, and she sounded young, like anywhere from my age to early 30s. I could hear splashing out there too, violent splashing, like the helpless thrashing you'd only hear from someone drowning. It was terrifying, especially because I hadn't heard a thing until then. I didn't even think. I just started swimming. I needed to save her. I was 100% convinced there was a person out there who was moments away from dying. I yelled out to her a few times in between strokes, but she never acknowledged me. She kept repeating, "Help me," over and over again, like she didn't even know I was there. I couldn't really think. Amidst the chaos and panic of the moment, I didn't consider how dangerous what I was doing really was. The further out I got, the more urgent the situation became. She was gonna die. I kept thinking it. The thought consumed my brain to the point that I was in a trance. I kept swimming as fast as I could, but no matter how much distance I covered, the screaming and thrashing always seemed to be the same distance away. The only thing that made sense was that the current must have been carrying her at the same rate I was swimming. Suddenly, I felt really cold. It was like I had crossed an invisible line and the temperature dropped several degrees all at once. It was enough to snap me out of my trance, and that's when it hit me how far out I was. I turned around and looked back toward the shoreline. The sight that met my eyes was terrifying. The beach was this tiny little strip of sand, so small and unfamiliar looking that it felt like I was looking at it from a boat. I was significantly further out into the ocean than I had ever been at night before. Hell, maybe ever, and I had no idea how I'd covered that much distance without noticing. The worst part about the situation was that I could still hear that woman thrashing around somewhere ahead of me. I tried convincing myself that I was closer to her now than I had initially been, but that wasn't true. She was just as far away from me as she'd been when I first heard her yelling. I was debating whether to keep going or not, when the sounds just abruptly stopped. Complete silence. Wherever she had been, she was gone now. I was just about to call out to her when something stopped me. It was like this gut feeling urging me to swim back to shore. I couldn't explain it, but it was real, and it took me from mostly confused to downright scared. I was alone in open water at night, God knows how far from shore, and I had expended all my energy chasing a woman who had suddenly disappeared. I knew I had made the wrong decision and immediately started swimming back. The first thing I felt was the current working against me. Every stroke was taking twice the effort it should have. I was quickly getting tired, and I felt myself being dragged along the coast more intensely than I could swim toward it. I had to keep going, though. It was swim or die. I don't know if it was the exhaustion or the chaos or the fear or something else, but I was starting to disassociate, and I could feel myself getting dizzy. My vision was getting blurry. I don't remember when, but at some point, something grabbed my ankle. I don't mean I felt something brush against me. Something that felt like a rope or a cord wrapped tightly around my ankle and started yanking me down. I was submerged before I could even react. I swallowed a bunch of water and started kicking wildly. It was pulling me deeper, but I was eventually able to break free. I made it back to the surface and started swimming again. I don't remember much about the last stretch. All I remember is touching sand at one point and practically crawling out of the water. I didn't make it that far before I collapsed on the beach and just laid there, trying not to throw up. It was without a doubt the closest to death I had ever been. Eventually, I regained enough strength to sit up. My head was pounding. There was a dark greenish band around my ankle, sort of like a bruise, but not exactly. It wrapped all the way around in a clean line, right where I'd felt the thing grab me. I looked back out at the ocean. I didn't see anything and didn't hear anything, but I didn't care. I grabbed my stuff off the lifeguard chair and went home. I must have slept for like 12 hours that night, and that was that. It was like a fever dream. I will say I didn't go for any night swims for the rest of the summer, and I'd be lying if I didn't say the events of that night didn't weigh on me for a while. There was a version of that night where a real woman was drowning, and I swam out to help her and couldn't reach her in time, and she died. Despite everything else that happened, that's the thing that really got to me. But after more time passed, the less that explanation made sense. I started recalling more and more details about the whole thing and realized it was unlikely. Her voice had sounded identical every single time. Plus, she never said anything other than those two words, and no matter how far I swam out, she never got any closer. Here's the worst part about all of it, though. And this is the thing that still freaks me out whenever I think about that night. My ankle. That thing had grabbed my ankle. What even was that? It definitely wasn't seaweed. The mark on my ankle also didn't fade for 2 whole days, no matter how aggressively I showered. Like I said before, it was green and looked more like a stain than a bruise, and it didn't hurt at all. One of my friends suggested I had fallen into an elaborate trap, but that doesn't make any sense. The likelihood that someone could reasonably expect an innocent victim to be in the water at that hour was practically zero. I discarded that explanation almost immediately because it was just so implausible. I've never been someone who believed in the paranormal, but I genuinely believe something happened to me that night that doesn't have a normal explanation. I've since changed the way I think about those sort of things. This was about 2 years ago. I had just finished a dead-end job. Not even going to bother saying what it was, and I was in no rush to find the next thing. I had some money saved up, and I was in that phase where I just wanted to be outside and think. I was 24, single, living cheap, and more interested in figuring out what exactly I wanted to do in my life than in doing anything specific. My friend Peter was in a similar place. He dropped out of a master's program a few months earlier and was bartending while he sorted himself out. We spent a lot of time together that summer, just driving around, camping, hiking, stuff like that. One weekend, we decided to camp out overnight on a beach. It was actually Peter's idea, but I was fully on board. I wasn't sure of the legality of something like that, and neither was he, so we decided to avoid any popular beaches with boardwalks or lots of tourists. We both live about 20 minutes inland, so we had a ton of options. We ended up just picking some random beach about an hour's drive away. It was just a quiet stretch of sand in a residential area where we knew we wouldn't be bothered. The houses along that section were set back from the water, and we were pretty sure the only people who used that beach were people who actually lived there. No one would even notice us. Peter had been to that beach before during the day. Not the exact stretch we picked, but close enough, and he said it felt private. We got there in the late afternoon and set up. It was October and a little chilly, so the plan was to pitch a tent and sleep in there should it get too cold or windy. Being out there all alone, surrounded by nothing but the ocean and the sky, was really peaceful. We built a fire in a shallow pit, cooked some food, and just sat there on the sand watching the water. By the time we finished eating, the sun had already set. I don't drink, and I didn't at the time either, but Peter cracked a beer, and he was nice enough to have brought me a non-alcoholic one. So the two of us are just sitting there on the beach, talking, having a good time, when I noticed something out over the water. It was this faint light hovering somewhere near the horizon. At first, I thought it was a boat or maybe a distant ship. I pointed it out to Peter, and the two of us watched it for a minute. It wasn't unusual in the slightest. Ships passed through there all the time, but something about it just seemed off. Eventually, I realized what it was. The light was skipping around erratically, like jumping from spot to spot, not drifting across the horizon the way a vessel would. It flicked from one spot to another almost instantly, like it had blinked out and then reappeared 10 degrees to the left. It kept doing that every so often. The unnatural skipping, but it would glitch at times too. It's kind of hard to describe because I had never seen anything like it. It also must have been approaching us slightly because at one point I realized it was green, not white or yellow or that ambery color you'd see from a normal ship's lights. It was actually distinctly green, not bright but clearly visible against the dark sky. Peter suggested we get up and move closer to the water for a better look, which we did, but still that didn't help much. The two of us spent the next several minutes going back and forth on what it could be. Drones, helicopters, light reflection from a plane, some kind of military exercise. It was possible, but like I said before, I'd never seen anything like it, and neither had Peter. There was also no sound at all. Not the faint sound of an engine or something like that, though I'm not sure if that was just because it was so far away. If I had been alone, I honestly would have thought I was hallucinating or daydreaming. But Peter was right next to me, and he was seeing the exact same thing. The light started moving a little faster, which I immediately assumed meant it was getting closer. The pauses between jumps got shorter, and the jumps themselves got wider. That's when I started getting a little scared. What had been a point of light on the horizon was now something I could perceive depth in. Like it had dimension to it, like it had gone from a dot to a glow. I was fixated. I don't know how long we watched it. It could have been anywhere from 10 minutes to 30. It felt like a long time. At a certain point, the light stopped getting closer and started doing something different. It began moving in a pattern, circles, or something close to circles. It was almost dancing or twinkling now as opposed to stuttering. Peter and I weren't even talking at that point. What was there to even say? Eventually, the light just abruptly disappeared. I didn't notice it recede. It was most like it just clicked off. We sat in silence for a while, waiting for it to reappear, but it didn't. Peter wanted to stay on the beach and keep watching, but I didn't. I convinced Peter that we should just seize the opportunity to go to sleep. It was pretty late at that point anyway, and I was admittedly feeling pretty unsettled. So the two of us got into the tent and zipped it shut. We tried to revive the mood for a little, but neither of us really wanted to talk or do much of anything else. So we ended up just going to sleep. The next thing I remember is Peter shaking me awake. It must have been sometime just after sunrise because I could see the light through the walls of the tent. I asked him what he was doing, still half asleep, but he just urged me to wake up and look. So I did. I crawled out of the tent and stood up, not sure what to expect. The first thing I saw was a circle in the sand around our tent, or more like a trench. Someone had dug a circle in the sand that went around our tent with maybe 3 or 4 feet of clearance on each side. It was eerily uniform in both width and depth, say 6 inches deep and a foot across. It was damn near a perfect circle carved into the beach around our tent. Before I could even rationalize what I was seeing, Peter waved me further down the beach. He had clearly seen everything already. I followed him, and to my horror, I realized there were more holes, dozens of them. They were roughly the same size, dug into the sand at irregular intervals. Some were clustered close together, and some were spaced further apart. There was no pattern to the placement that I could identify. They continued really far down the beach, to the point where it would have taken someone hours to do all of that by themselves. It got worse though. Peter pointed out a specific hole and told me to closely look at it. I did, and I realized that the sand was tinted green. It was subtle enough that you might not notice it at first glance, but once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. A bunch of the holes were tinted, and it was genuinely freaky because I didn't know how that was possible. My first instinct was to touch the sand and feel what it was. But as I reached my hand out, Peter yelled at me to stop. I turned around and asked him why, and he said I would be crazy to do that. I didn't really see what the harm would be, but I realized he was much more freaked out than I was, so I indulged him and didn't touch the sand. Seeing him like that freaked me out even more, and I got such a bad feeling in my gut that I just wanted to immediately pack up and leave. That's exactly what we did. We didn't talk much as we packed. I think both of us were trying to figure out if we were justified in feeling scared, because there was nothing actively threatening us in any way. There was no one there. It was just us, the holes, the circle, the green sand, and the beach. But the feeling was terrible. Something had been on that beach while we slept, close enough to dig a circle within arm's reach of our tent, and we hadn't heard a thing. Whatever the light was, whatever the holes were, and whatever had turned the sand green, it all happened while we were lying right there. As we were driving away, Peter eventually said something like, "What the f was that?" And I told him I didn't know. That was the extent of the conversation. I've been back to that beach during the day a couple times since then. The holes were gone within a few days, probably filled in by the tide. I couldn't find a trace of any of it. I've looked up everything I can think of. Bioluminescence, military testing ranges, tidal phenomena, sand composition changes. Nothing matches all of it at once. I thought the holes could have been caused by some kind of sea animal, but I was never able to find anything conclusive. I honest to God don't know what happened that night. The weirdest thing is actually how Peter reacted. He doesn't even like talking about that night, which I find strange because there's no harm in discussing it. He told me once that he just wanted to forget the whole thing, which I guess I don't blame him for. But his reaction freaked me out twice as much because fear is unusual for Peter. Either way, I know I'll never get an answer as to what happened that night. I've been diving since college. I'm in my late 30s now, and I've got somewhere around 80 dives logged, give or take. My buddy Ryan has about the same. We're not professionals by any means, but we're not beginners either. We've done enough to be comfortable at depth, which is probably what made this whole thing possible in the first place. This happened back in 2016, during a trip we took to Roatan, Honduras. There's a cargo wreck out there about 110 feet that's supposed to be a solid advanced dive. The site checked all the boxes. It was a good structure, not too technical, and there was decent marine life. We went out with a small local operation, maybe 6 divers total on the boat. The dive master gave us the standard briefing. Stay above 100 feet. The wreck sits on a slope, so the stern drops deeper. Don't penetrate the structure. 25 minutes max bottom time. We obviously took him seriously, but I have to admit, most of my attention was elsewhere, as was Ryan's. We'd heard it all before. We descended, and the wreck was awesome. It was this big, rusted hole with lots of structure to look at. This was maybe 60 feet, which is solid for that depth. We were swimming along the port side when we drifted toward the stern, which angled down the slope into deeper water. I checked my computer, and it read 105, which was essentially right at the limit. But those limits are extremely cautionary, which I knew, and so did Ryan. So I wasn't too concerned about pushing things slightly. I was extremely confident in my abilities at that age. Perhaps a little overconfident. And being with a daring guy like Ryan just amplified that self-assurance. As we kept swimming, I realized the lower section of the deck looked interesting. There was a large opening in the hull where a cargo hatch had rusted through, and you could see down onto the deck plating inside. Like I said, interesting. Ryan must have been thinking the same thing because he had already started descending without even glancing back at me. I kept thinking to myself, when am I going to get this chance again? Probably never. Diving spots are practically infinite, and I know there was a good chance I'd never be in Honduras again, let alone at that site. So I followed him. We dropped to about 120, then a little further. I was aware we were pushing it, but the wreck was compelling, and like I said before, Ryan was already ahead of me. Plus, splitting up while on a dive that deep was arguably less safe than what we were doing. Ryan abruptly stopped swimming, paused for a few seconds, then turned and gave me a signal. He was pointing at something on the deck just inside the hatch opening. I swam over and looked down. It actually took me a few seconds to properly process what I was seeing. There was something unnatural sitting on the rusted deck plating. I initially processed it as a jellyfish because that's what it was, and I want to be as clear as possible about what I was looking at. It was wrong. It was bright yellow, not dull yellow or brownish yellow, but brilliant and vivid, almost fluorescent, which was impossible. If you've ever been below 100 feet, you know that color doesn't exist down there. I'm not really sure how it works, but at depth, the water filters out warm light, so everything just looks blue and green. At 130 feet, which is around where we were, you could hold a red marble in front of your face and it would look gray. But this jellyfish looked like a mini light source. It was screaming yellow. At the time, I didn't feel scared. If anything, seeing it actually excited me. I got this uncontrollable, almost childish urge to start laughing, which I had to physically suppress. I kept looking at it. It was about the size of a basketball, slightly flattened, and it had texture to it. Folds or ridges like the surface of a brain. It was swaying very delicately back and forth, but it wasn't pulsating the way jellyfish normally would. It was just kind of sitting there on the metal. After a little while, my excitement faded away, but I couldn't take my eyes off of it. Ryan and I hovered over it, and at that point, I felt something that I still have trouble describing. I was completely locked in, but also zoned out. Sort of like I was forgetting where I was and what I was doing. I later found out that Ryan experienced the same thing. So there the two of us were, circling around this mysterious jellyfish without really understanding what it was. At one point, I saw Ryan extend his hand toward the thing. I watched him do it, and it didn't occur to me to stop him. He pulled it back before making contact, but I barely even reacted. And then, all of a sudden, my dive computer started screaming at me. I looked down, and it snapped me out of whatever haze I had been in. We were at 134 feet, and we'd been at depth for almost 30 minutes. My air was at 600 psi, which if you don't dive, that's emergency level. You're supposed to start heading up at 700. Ryan checked his, and his was worse. I looked at him, and he looked like he had just woken up, which was exactly how I felt. The next 10 or so minutes are kind of blurry. We ascended way too fast because we didn't have the air to do it properly. We did the best safety stops we could on what we had left, but it was bad. The next thing I remember is getting yelled at by the dive master, who was absolutely furious, and he should have been. I had a pounding headache for hours afterwards, and it was unlike any pain I had ever experienced. Ryan was worse. He threw up twice before we even made it back to the shore, and I remember feeling so bad for all the other divers we were with, especially the dive master. This isn't super relevant, but I ended up tipping him basically all the cash I had on me. Fast forward to later that night, and Ryan and I basically made a full recovery. We were just lounging in the hotel because neither of us wanted to do a thing besides sleep. We spent a good 20 minutes or so talking about the jellyfish we had seen down there, trying to figure out if there was some kind of fluorescent species or something else that could have explained it. Ryan suddenly remembered that he had recorded the entire dive with his GoPro, which I had also completely forgotten about on account of the decompression sickness. The two of us watched the footage back, and Ryan skipped ahead to the part where we had seen it. I kept anticipating a yellow glow flooding the screen, but here's the thing, it never did. For about 8.5 minutes, the footage showed the two of us hovering over a bare section of rusted deck plating. There was no jellyfish. It was worse than that. There was nothing there at all. No object of any kind. We were circling a completely empty patch of metal. The entire thing had been a hallucination, which was a terrifying thought. It was obviously nitrogen narcosis. At 130 feet on air, you can absolutely get narked. The effects vary: impaired judgment, euphoria, fixation on objects, loss of time awareness, and several other things. That's the medical explanation, and it fits almost perfectly, except for one thing. We both saw the same exact thing. We didn't talk about it underwater, obviously, because you can't, but when we later described it to each other independently, it matched. The color, the size, the texture, the way it sat on the deck, everything. Ryan described the membrane-like ridges the same way I remembered them. Narcosis obviously doesn't work that way. It's an individual response. Two divers narked at the same depth at the same time will experience different symptoms. One might feel euphoric while the other gets anxious. Shared visual hallucinations with identical physical details aren't a documented feature of nitrogen narcosis. I don't think that would even be possible. I looked this up obsessively for weeks after we got home, but found nothing conclusive. There's nothing on Earth that can cause a shared visual hallucination. Ryan and I kept diving together for a few years after that incident, but we eventually fell out of touch. I still dive when I get the chance, but things just got too busy and never changed. This is still something I don't fully understand, and probably never will. The thing that gets me isn't what we saw. I can live with not knowing what it was. The thing that gets me is that the two of us had the exact same hallucination. The only plausible explanation I could think of is that Ryan's narcosis effects were so much worse than mine that he just remembered what I described. But I swear he described details about that jellyfish before I did that he couldn't have possibly known if he hadn't seen it as well. Everyone I've told this story to thinks it's something supernatural, and I've since changed my viewpoint about that stuff because of it.